The Romantic Adventures of a Milkmaid, by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 1. It was 4:30, by the testimony of the land surveyor, my authority for the particulars of this story, a gentleman with the faintest curve of humour on his lips. It was 4:30 on a May morning in the 1840s. A dense white fog hung over the valley of the Exe, ending against the hills on either side. But though nothing in the vale could be seen from higher ground, notes of different kinds gave pretty clear indications that bustling life was going on there. This audible presence and visual absence of an active scene had a peculiar effect above the fog level. Nature had laid a white hand over the creatures ensconced within the vale, as a hand might be laid over a nest of chirping birds. The noises that ascended through the pallid coverlid were perturbed lowings, mingled with human voices in sharps and flats, and the bark of a dog. These, followed by the slamming of a gate, explained, as well as eyesight could have done, to any inhabitant of the district, that Dairyman Tucker's under-milker was driving the cows from the meads into the stalls. When a rougher accent joined in the vociferations of man and beast, it would have been realized that the dairy farmer himself had come out to meet the cows, pail in hand and white pinafore on; and when, moreover, some women's voices joined in the chorus, that the cows were stalled, and proceedings about to commence. A hush followed, the atmosphere being so stagnant that the milk could be heard buzzing into the pails, together with occasional words of the milkmaids and men. "Don't ye abide about long upon the road, Margery. You can be back again by skimming time." The rough voice of Dairyman Tucker was the vehicle of this remark. The barton gate slammed again, and in 2 or 3 minutes a something became visible, rising out of the fog in that quarter. The shape revealed itself as that of a woman, having a young and agile gait. The colours and other details of her dress were then disclosed. A bright pink cotton frock, because winter was over, a small woollen shawl of shepherd's plaid, because summer was not come, a white handkerchief tied over her head-gear, because it was so foggy, so damp, and so early, and a straw bonnet and ribbons peeping from under the handkerchief, because it was likely to be a sunny May day. Her face was of the hereditary type among families down in these parts, sweet in expression, perfect in hue, and somewhat irregular in feature. Her eyes were of a liquid brown. On her arm she carried a withy basket, in which lay several butter rolls and a nest of wet cabbage leaves. She was the Margery who had been told not to bide about long upon the road. She went on her way across the fields, sometimes above the fog, sometimes below it, not much perplexed by its presence, except when the track was so indefinite that it ceased to be a guide to the next stile. The dampness was such that innumerable earthworms lay in couples across the path, till, startled even by her light tread, they withdrew suddenly into their holes. She kept clear of all trees. Why was that? There was no danger of lightning on such morning as this. Though the roads were dry, the fog had gathered in the boughs, causing them to set up such a dripping as would go clean through the protecting handkerchief like bullets, and spoil the ribbons beneath. The beech and ash were particularly shunned, for they dripped more maliciously than any. It was an instance of woman's keen appreciativeness of nature's moods and peculiarities. A man crossing those fields might hardly have perceived that the trees dripped at all. In less than an hour she had traversed a distance of 4 miles, and arrived at a latticed cottage in a secluded spot. An elderly woman, scarce awake, answered her knocking. Margery delivered up the butter, and said, "How is Granny this morning? I can't stay to go up to her, but tell her I have returned what we owed her." Her grandmother was no worse than usual, and receiving back the empty basket, the girl proceeded to carry out some intention which had not been included in her orders. Instead of returning to the light labours of skimming time, she hastened on, her direction being towards a little neighbouring town. Before, however, Margery had proceeded far, she met the postman, laden to the neck with letter-bags, of which he had not yet deposited one. "Are the shops open yet, Samuel?" she said. "Oh, no," replied that stooping pedestrian, not waiting to stand upright. "They won't be open yet this hour, except the saddler and ironmonger, and little tacker-haired machine man for the farm folk. They downs their shutters at 6:30, then the bakers at 7:30, then the drapers at 8. Oh, the drapers at 8. It was plain that Margery had wanted the drapers. The postman turned up a side path, and the young girl, as though deciding within herself that if she could not go shopping at once she might as well get back for the skimming, retraced her steps. The public road home from the Point was easy, but devious. By far the nearest way was getting over a fence and crossing the private grounds of a picturesque old country house, whose chimneys were just visible through the trees. As the house had been shut up for many months, the girl decided to take the straight cut. She pushed her way through the laurel bushes, sheltering her bonnet with the shawl as an additional safeguard, scrambled over an inner boundary, went along through more shrubberies, and stood ready to emerge upon the open lawn. Before doing so she looked around in the wary manner of a poacher. It was not the first time that she had broken fence in her life, but somehow, and all of a sudden, she had felt herself too near womanhood to indulge in such practices with freedom. However, she moved forth, and the house front stared her in the face, at this higher level, unobscured by fog. It was a building of the medium size, and unpretending, the façade being of stone, and of the Italian elevation made familiar by Inigo Jones and his school. There was a doorway to the lawn, standing at the head of a flight of steps. The shutters of the house were closed, and the blinds of the bedrooms drawn down. Her perception of the fact that no crusty caretaker could see her from the windows led her at once to slacken her pace and stroll through the flower-beds coolly. A house unblinded is a possible spy, and must be treated accordingly. A house with the shutters together is an insensate heap of stone and mortar, to be faced with indifference. On the other side of the house the greensward rose to an eminence, whereon stood one of those curious summer shelters, sometimes erected on exposed points of view, called an all-the-year-round. In the present case it consisted of 4 walls radiating from a centre like the arms of a turnstile, with seats in each angle, so that whensoever the wind came, it was always possible to find a screened corner from which to observe the landscape. The Milkmaid's trackless course led her up the hill and past this erection. At ease as to being watched and scolded as an intruder, her mind flew to other matters, till, at the moment when she was not a yard from the shelter, she heard a foot or feet scraping on the gravel below. Some one was in all the year round, apparently occupying the seat on the other side, as was proved when, on turning, she saw an elbow, a man's elbow, projecting over the edge. Now, the young woman did not much like the idea of going down the hill under the eyes of this person, which she would have to do if she went on, for as an intruder she was liable to be called back and questioned upon her business there. Accordingly, she crept softly up, and sat in the seat behind, intending to remain there until her companion should leave. This he by no means seemed in a hurry to do. What could possibly have brought him there? What could detain him there at 6 o'clock, on a morning of mist, where there was nothing to be seen or enjoyed of the vale beneath, puzzled her not a little. But he remained quite still, and Margery grew impatient. She discerned the track of his feet in the dewy grass, forming a line from the house steps, which announced that he was an inhabitant and not a chance passer-by. At last she peeped round. End of Chapter 1. The Romantic Adventures of a Milkmaid, by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 2. A fine-framed, dark-mustachioed gentleman, in dressing-gown and slippers, was sitting there in the damp without a hat on. With one hand he was tightly grasping his forehead, the other hung over his knee. The attitude bespoke with sufficient clearness a mental condition of anguish. He was quite a different being from any of the men to whom her eyes were accustomed. She had never seen mustachios before, for they were not worn by civilians in Lower Wessex at this date. His hands and his face were white, to her view deadly white, and he heeded nothing outside his own existence. There he remained as motionless as the bushes around him. Indeed, he scarcely seemed to breathe. Having imprudently advanced thus far, Marjorie's wish was to get back in the same unseen manner, but in moving her foot for the purpose it grated on the gravel. He stood up with an air of bewilderment, and slipped something into the pocket of his dressing-gown. She was almost certain that it was a pistol. The pair stood looking blankly at each other. "My God! Who are you?" he asked sternly, and with not altogether an English articulation. "What do you do here?" Marjorie had already begun to be frightened at her boldness in invading the lawn and pleasure seat. The house had a master, and she had not known of it. "My name is Margaret Tucker, sir," she said meekly. "My father is Dairyman Tucker. We live at Silverthorn Dairy House." "What are you doing here at this hour of the morning?" She told him, even to the fact that she had climbed over the fence. "And what made you peep round at me?" "I saw your elbows, sir, and I wondered what you were doing." "And what was I doing?" "Nothing. You had one hand on your forehead and the other on your knee. I do hope you are not ill, sir, or in deep trouble." Marjorie had sufficient tact to say nothing about the pistol. "What difference would it make to you if I were ill or in trouble? You don't know me." She returned no answer, feeling that she might have taken a liberty in expressing sympathy. But looking furtively up at him, she discerned to her surprise that he seemed affected by her humane wish, simply as it had been expressed. She had scarcely conceived that such a tall dark man could know what gentle feelings were. "Well, I am much obliged to you for caring how I am," said he, with a faint smile and an affected lightness of manner, which even to her only rendered more apparent the gloom beneath. "I have not slept this past night. I suffer from sleeplessness. Probably you do not." Marjorie laughed a little, and he glanced with interest at the comely picture she presented. Her fresh face, brown hair, candid eyes, unpractised manner, country dress, pink hands, empty wicker basket, and the handkerchief over her bonnet. "Well," he said after scrutiny, "I need hardly have asked such a question of one who is nature's own image. Ah, but my good little friend," he added, recurring to his bitter tone and sitting wearily down, "you don't know what great clouds can hang over some people's lives, and what cowards some men are in the face of them. To escape themselves they travel, take picturesque houses, and engage in country sports. But here it is so dreary, and the fog was horrible this morning." "Why, this is only the pride of the morning," said Marjorie. "By and by it will be a beautiful day." She was going on her way forthwith, but he detained her with words, talking on every innocent little subject he could think of. He had an object in keeping her there more serious than his words would imply. It was as if he feared to be left alone. While they still stood, the misty figure of the postman, whom Marjorie had left a quarter of an hour earlier to follow her sinuous course, crossed the grounds below them on his way to the house. Signifying to Marjorie by a wave of his hand that she was to step back out of sight, in the hinder angle of the shelter, the gentleman beckoned to the postman to bring the bag to where he stood. The man did so, and again resumed his journey. The stranger unlocked the bag, and threw it on the seat, having taken one letter from within. This he read attentively, and his countenance changed. The change was almost phantasmagorical, as if the sun had burst through the fog upon that face. It became clear, bright, almost radiant. Yet it was but a change that may take place in the commonest human being, provided his countenance be not too wooden, or his artifice have not grown to second nature. He turned to Marjorie, who was again edging off, and seizing her hand appeared as though he were about to embrace her. Checking his impulse, he said, "My guardian child, my good friend, you have saved me." "What from?" she ventured to ask. "That you may never know." She thought of the weapon, and guessed that the letter he had just received had effected this change in his mood, but made no observation till he went on to say, "What did you tell me your name was, dear girl?" She repeated her name. "Margaret Tucker." He stooped and pressed her hand. "Sit down for a moment. One moment," he said, pointing to the end of the seat, and taking the extremest further end for himself, not to discompose her. She sat down. "It is to ask a question," he went on, "and there must be confidence between us. You have saved me from an act of madness. What can I do for you?" "Nothing, sir." "Nothing?" "Father is very well off, and we don't want anything." "But there must be some service I can render, some kindness, some votive offering which I could make, and so imprint on your memory as long as you live that I am not an ungrateful man." "Why should you be grateful to me, sir?" He shook his head. "Some things are best left unspoken. Now think, what would you like to have best in the world?" Margery made a pretence of reflecting, then fell to reflecting seriously, but the negative was ultimately as undisturbed as ever. She could not decide on anything she would like best in the world. It was too difficult, too sudden. "Very well, don't hurry yourself. Think it over all day. I ride this afternoon. You live where?" "Silverthorn Dairy House." "I will ride that way, homeward this evening. Do you consider by 8 o'clock what little article, what little treat, you would most like of any." "I will, sir," said Margery, now warming up to the idea. "Where shall I meet you, or will you call at the house, sir?" "Ah, no. I should not wish the circumstances known out of which our acquaintance rose. It would be more proper, but no." Margery, too, seemed rather anxious that he should not call. "I could come out, sir," she said. "My father is odd-tempered, and perhaps—" It was agreed that she should look over a stile at the top of her father's garden, and that he should ride along a bridle path outside to receive her answer. "Margery," said the gentleman in conclusion, "now that you have discovered me under ghastly conditions, are you going to reveal them, and make me an object for the gossip of the curious?" "No, no, sir," she replied earnestly. "Why should I do that?" "You will never tell?" "Never, never will I tell what has happened here this morning." "Neither to your father, nor to your friends, nor to anyone?" "To no one at all," she said. "It is sufficient," he answered. "You mean what you say, my dear maiden. Now you want to leave me. Good-bye." She descended the hill, walking with some awkwardness, for she felt the stranger's eyes were upon her till the fog had enveloped her from his gaze. She took no notice now of the dripping from the trees. She was lost in thought on other things. Had she saved this handsome, melancholy, sleepless foreign gentleman who had had a trouble on his mind till the letter came? What had he been going to do? Margery could guess that he had meditated death at his own hand. Strange as the incident had been in itself, to her it had seemed stranger even than it was. Contrasting colours heighten each other by being juxtaposed. It is the same with contrasting lives. Reaching the opposite side of the park, there appeared before her for the third time that little old man, the foot-post. As the turnpike road ran, the postman's beat was 12 miles a day, 6 miles out from the town, and 6 miles back at night. But what with zigzags, devious ways, offsets to country seats, curves to farms, looped courses, and triangles to outlying hamlets, the ground actually covered by him was nearer 21 miles. Hence it was that Margery, who had come straight, was still abreast of him despite her long pause. The weighty sense that she was mixed up in a tragical secret with an unknown and handsome stranger prevented her joining very readily in chat with the postman for some time. But a keen interest in her adventure caused her to respond at once, when the bowed man of mails said, "You hit athwart the grounds of Mount Lodge, Miss Margery, or you wouldn't have met me here. Well, somebody hae took the old place at last." In acknowledging her route, Margery brought herself to ask who the new gentleman might be. "Guide the girl's heart! What, don't she know? And yet how should ye? He's only just a come. Well, nominal, he's a fishing gentleman, come for the summer only. But more to the subject, he's a foreign noble that's lived in England so long as to be without any true country. Some of his letters call him baron, some squire, so that he must be born to something that can't be earned by elbow grease and Christian conduct. He was out this morning a-watching the fog. 'Postman,' he said, 'good morning, give me the bag.' Oh, yes, he's a civil, genteel nobleman enough." "Took the house for fishing, did he?" "That's what they say, and as it can be for nothing else, I suppose it's true. But in final, His health's not good, I believe. He's been living too rithe. The London smoke got into his windpipe till he couldn't eat. However, I shouldn't mind having the run of his kitchen." "And what is his name?" "Ah, there you have me. 'Tis a name no man's tongue can tell, or even woman's, except by pen and ink, and good scholarship. It begins with X. And who, without the machinery of a clock's insides, can speak that? But here 'tis, from his letters." The postman with his walking stick wrote upon the ground, "Baron von Xanten." End of chapter 2. The Romantic Adventures of a Milkmaid, by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 3. The day, as she had prognosticated, turned out fine, for weather wisdom was imbibed with their milksops by the children of the Exe Vale. The impending meeting excited Margery, and she performed her duties in her father's house with mechanical unconsciousness. Milking, skimming, cheese-making were done. Her father was asleep in the settle, the milkmen and maids were gone home to their cottages, and the clock showed 7:15. She dressed herself with care, went to the top of the garden, and looked over the stile. The view was eastward, and a great moon hung before her in a sky which had not a cloud. Nothing was moving except on the minutest scale, and she remained leaning over, the night-hawk sounding his crowd from the bough of an isolated tree on the open hillside. Here Margery waited till the appointed time had passed by 3/4 of an hour, but no Baron came. She had been full of an idea, and her heart sank with disappointment. Then at last the pacing of a horse became audible on the soft path without, leading up from the water meads, simultaneously with which she beheld the form of the stranger riding home as he had said. The moonlight so flooded her face as to make her very conspicuous in the garden gap. "Ah, my maiden, what is your name?" "Margery," he said. "How came you here?" "But of course I remember. We were to meet, and it was to be at 8. Pro pudor! I have kept you waiting." "It doesn't matter, sir. I've thought of something." "Thought of something?" "Yes, sir. You said this morning that I was to think what I would like best in the world, and I have made up my mind." "I did say so, to be sure I did," he replied, collecting his thoughts. "I remember to have had good reason for gratitude to you." He placed his hand to his brow, and in a minute alighted, and came up to her with the bridle in his hand. "I was to give you a treat or present, and you could not think of one. Now you have done so. Let me hear what it is, and I'll be as good as my word." "To go to the yeomanry ball that's to be given this month." "The yeomanry ball. Yeomanry ball?" he murmured, as if of all requests in the world this was what he had least expected. "Where is what you call the yeomanry ball?" "At Exonbury." "Have you ever been to it before?" "No, sir." "Or to any ball?" "No." "But did I not say a gift, a present?" "Or a treat." "Ah, yes, or a treat," he echoed, with the air of one who finds himself in a slight fix. "But with whom would you propose to go?" "I don't know. I have not thought of that yet." "You have no friend who could take you, even if I got you an invitation?" Margery looked at the moon. "No one who can dance," she said, adding with hesitation, "I was thinking that perhaps—" "But, my dear Margery," he said, stopping her as if he half divined what her simple dream of a cavalier had been, "it is very odd that you can think of nothing else than going to a yeomanry ball. Think again. You are sure there is nothing else?" "Quite sure, sir," she decisively answered. At first nobody would have noticed in that pretty young face any sign of decision, yet it was discoverable. The mouth, though soft, was firm in line, the eyebrows were distinct, and extended near to each other. "I have thought of it all day," she continued sadly. "Still, sir, if you are sorry you offered me anything, I can let you off." "Sorry? Certainly not, Margery," he said, rather nettled. "I'll show you that whatever hopes I have raised in your breast I am honourable enough to gratify. If it lies in my power," he added with sudden firmness, "you shall go to the yeomanry ball. In what building is it to be held?" "In the assembly room." "And would you be likely to be recognized there?" Do you know many people?"
"Not many, sir. None, I may say. I know nobody who goes to balls."
"Ah, well, you must go, since you wish it; and if there is no other way of getting over the difficulty of having nobody to take you, I'll take you myself. Would you like me to do so? I can dance."
"Oh, yes, sir, I know that, and I thought you might offer to do it. But would you bring me back again?"
"Of course I'll bring you back. But, by the by, can you dance?"
"Yes."
"What?"
"Reels and jigs and country dances, like the New Rigged Ship, and Follow My Lover, and Haste to the Wedding, and the College Hornpipe, and the Favourite Quickstep, and Captain White's Dance."
"A very good list, very good. But unluckily I fear they don't dance any of those now. But if you have the instinct, we may soon cure your ignorance. Let me see you dance a moment." She stood out into the garden path, the stile being still between them, and seizing a side of her skirt with each hand, performed the movements which are even yet far from uncommon in the dances of the villagers of merry England. But her motions, though graceful, were not precisely those which appear in the figures of a modern ball-room. "Well, my good friend, it is a very pretty sight," he said, warming up to the proceedings. "But you dance too well. You dance all over your person, and that's too thorough a way for the present day. I should say it was exactly how they danced in the time of your poet Chaucer. But as people don't dance like it now, we must consider. First I must inquire more about this ball, and then I must see you again."
"If it is no great trouble to you, sir,
"Oh, no, no. I will think it over. So far so good." The Baron mentioned an evening and an hour when he would be passing that way again, then mounted his horse and rode away. On the next occasion, which was just when the sun was changing places with the moon as an illuminator of Silverthorn Dairy, she found him at the spot before her, and unencumbered by a horse. The melancholy that had so weighed him down at their first interview, and had been perceptible at their second, had quite disappeared. He pressed her right hand between both of his across the stile. "My good maiden, God bless you," he said warmly. "I cannot help thinking of that morning. I was too much overshadowed at first to take in the whole force of it. You do not know all, but your presence was a miraculous intervention. Now to more cheerful matters. I have a great deal to tell, that is, if your wish about the ball be still the same."
"Oh, yes, sir, if you don't object."
"Never think of my objecting. What I have found out is something which simplifies matters amazingly. In addition to your yeomanry ball at Exonbury, there is also to be one in the next county about the same time. The ball is not to be held at the town hall of the county town, as usual, but at Lord Toneborough's, who is colonel of the regiment, and who, I suppose, wishes to please the yeoman, because his brother is going to stand for the county. Now I find I could take you there very well, and the great advantage of that ball over the yeomanry ball in this county is, that there you would be absolutely unknown, and I also. But do you prefer your own neighbourhood?"
"Oh, no, sir, it is a ball I long to see. I don't know what it is like. It does not matter where."
"Good. Then I shall be able to make much more of you there, where there is no possibility of recognition. That being settled, the next thing is the dancing. Now reels and such things do not do. For think of this. There is a new dance at Almack's and everywhere else, over which the world has gone crazy."
"How dreadful!"
"Ah, but that is a mere expression. Gone mad. It is really an ancient Scythian dance. But such is the power of fashion that, having once been adopted by society, this dance has made the tour of the continent in one season."
"What is its name, sir?"
"The polka. Young people who always dance are ecstatic about it, and old people who have not danced for years have begun to dance again on its account. All share the excitement. It arrived in London only some few months ago. It is now all over the country. Now this is your opportunity, my good Margery. To learn this one dance will be enough. They will dance scarce anything else at the ball; while, to crown all, it is the easiest dance in the world, and as I know it quite well, I can practise you in the step. Suppose we try?" Margery showed some hesitation before crossing the stile. It was a Rubicon in more ways than one. But the curious reverence which was stealing over her for all that the stranger said and did was too much for prudence. She crossed the stile. Withdrawing with her to a nook where the two high hedges met, and where the grass was elastic and dry, he lightly rested his arm on her waist, and practised with her the new step of fascination. Instead of music he whispered numbers, and she, as may be supposed, showed no slight aptness in following his instructions. Thus they moved round together, the moon shadows from the twigs racing over their forms as they turned. The interview lasted about half an hour. Then he somewhat abruptly handed her over the stile, and stood looking at her from the other side. "Well," he murmured, "what has come to pass is strange. My whole business after this will be to recover my right mind." Margery always declared that there seemed to be some power in the stranger that was more than human, something magical and compulsory, when he seized her and gently trotted her round. But lingering emotions may have led her memory to play pranks with the scene, and her vivid imagination at that youthful age must be taken into account in believing her. However, there is no doubt that the stranger, whoever he might be and whatever his powers, taught her the elements of modern dancing at a certain interview by moonlight at the top of her father's garden, as was proved by her possession of knowledge on the subject that could have been acquired in no other way. His was of the first rank of commanding figures. She was one of the most agile of milkmaids, and to casual view it would have seemed all of a piece with nature's doings that they should go on thus. But there was another side to the case, and whether the strange gentleman were a wild olive-tree or no, it was questionable if the acquaintance would lead to happiness. A fleeting romance and a possible calamity: thus it might have been summed up by the practical. Margery was in paradise, and yet she was not at this date distinctly in love with the stranger. What she felt was something more mysterious, more of the nature of veneration. As he looked at her across the stile she spoke timidly on a subject which had apparently occupied her long. "I ought to have a ball dress, ought I not, sir?" "Certainly, and you shall have a ball dress." "Really?" "No doubt of it. I won't do things by halves for my best friend. I have thought of the ball dress, and of other things also." "And is my dancing good enough?" "Quite, quite." He paused, lapsed into thought, and looked at her. "Margery," he said, "do you trust yourself unreservedly to me?" "Oh yes, sir," she replied blithely, "if I am not too much trouble. If I am good enough to be seen in your society." The Baron laughed in a peculiar way. "Really, I think you may assume as much as that. However, to business. The ball is on the 25th, that is next Thursday week, and the only difficulty about the dress is the size. Suppose you lend me this," and he touched her on the shoulder to signify a tight little jacket she wore. Margery was all obedience. She took it off and handed it to him. The Baron rolled and compressed it with all his force till it was about as large as an apple dumpling, and put it into his pocket. "The next thing," he said, "is about getting the consent of your friends to your going. Have you thought of this?" "There is only my father. I can tell him I am invited to a party, and I don't think he'll mind, though I would rather not tell him." "But it strikes me that you must inform him something of what you intend. I would strongly advise you to do so." He spoke as if rather perplexed as to the probable custom of the English peasantry in such matters, and added, "However, it is for you to decide. I know nothing of the circumstances. As to getting to the ball, the plan I have arranged is this. The direction of Lord Tonborough's being the other way from my house, you must meet me at the Three Walks End, in Chillington Wood, 2 miles or more from here. You know the place? Good. By meeting there we shall save 5 or 6 miles of journey, a consideration, as it is a long way. Now, for the last time, are you still firm in your wish for this particular treat and no other? It is not too late to give it up. Cannot you think of something else, something better, some useful household articles you require?" Margery's countenance, which before had been beaming with expectation, lost its brightness. Her lips became close and her voice broken. "You have offered to take me, and now—" "No, no, no," he said, patting her cheek. "We will not think of anything else. You shall go." End of Chapter 3. The Romantic Adventures of a Milkmaid, by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 4. But whether the Baron, in naming such a distant spot for the rendezvous, was in hope she might fail him, and so relieve him after all of his undertaking, cannot be said, though it might have been strongly suspected from his manner that he had no great zest for the responsibility of escorting her. But he little knew the firmness of the young woman he had to deal with. She was one of those soft natures whose power of adhesiveness to an acquired idea seems to be one of the special attributes of that softness. To go to a ball with this mysterious personage of romance was her ardent desire and aim, and none the less in that she trembled with fear and excitement at her position in so aiming. She felt the deepest awe, tenderness, and humility towards the Baron of the strange name, and yet she was prepared to stick to her point. Thus it was that the afternoon of the eventful day found Margery trudging her way up the slopes from the vale to the place of appointment. She walked to the music of innumerable birds, which increased as she drew away from the open meads towards the groves. She had overcome all difficulties. After thinking out the question of telling or not telling her father, she had decided that to tell him was to be forbidden to go. Her contrivance, therefore, was this: to leave home this evening on a visit to her invalid grandmother, who lived not far from the Baron's house, but not to arrive at her grandmother's till breakfast time next morning. Who would suspect an intercalated experience of 12 hours with the Baron at a ball? That this piece of deception was indefensible she afterwards owned readily enough, but she did not stop to think of it then. It was sunset within Chillington Wood by the time she reached Three Walks End, the converging point of radiating trackways, now floored with a carpet of matted grass, which had never known other sighs than the teeth of rabbits and hares. The twitter overhead had ceased, except from a few braver and larger birds, including the cuckoo, who did not fear night at this pleasant time of year. Nobody seemed to be on the spot when she first drew near, but no sooner did Margery stand at the intersection of the roads than a slight crashing became audible, and her patron appeared. He was so transfigured in dress that she scarcely knew him. Under a light greatcoat, which was flung open, instead of his ordinary clothes, he wore a suit of thin black cloth, an open waistcoat with a frill all down his shirt-front, a white tie, shining boots no thicker than a glove, a coat that made him look like a bird, and a hat that seemed as if it would open and shut like an accordion. "I am dressed for the ball, nothing worse," he said, dryly smiling. "So will you be soon." "Why did you choose this place for our meeting, sir?" she asked, looking around and acquiring confidence. "Why did I choose it? Well, because in riding past one day I observed a large hollow tree close by here, and it occurred to me, when I was last with you, that this would be useful for our purpose. Have you told your father?" "I have not told him, sir." "That is very bad of you, Margery. How have you arranged it, then?" She briefly related her plan, on which he made no comment, but taking her by the hand as if she were a little child, he led her through the undergrowth to a spot where the trees were older, and standing at wider distances. Among them was the tree he had spoken of, an elm, huge, hollow, distorted, and headless, with a rift in its side. "Now go inside," he said, "before it gets any darker. You will find there everything you want. At any rate, if you do not, you must do without it. I'll keep watch, and don't be longer than you can help to be." "What am I to do, sir?" asked the puzzled maiden. "Go inside, and you will see. When you are ready, wave your handkerchief at that hole." She stooped into the opening. The cavity within the tree formed a lofty circular apartment, 4 or 5 feet in diameter, to which daylight entered at the top, and also through a round hole about 6 feet from the ground, marking the spot at which a limb had been amputated in the tree's prime. The decayed wood of cinnamon brown, forming the inner surface of the tree, and the warm evening glow, reflected in at the top, suffused the cavity with a faint, mellow radiance. But Margery had hardly given herself time to heed these things. Her eye had been caught by objects of quite another quality. A large white oblong paper box lay against the inside of the tree. Over it on a splinter hung a small oval looking-glass. Margery seized the idea in a moment. She pressed through the rift into the tree, lifted the cover of the box, and behold, there was disclosed within a lovely white apparition in a somewhat flattened state. It was the ball dress. This marvel of art was, briefly, a sort of heavenly cobweb. It was a gossamer texture of precious manufacture, artistically festooned in a dozen flounces or more. Margery lifted it, and could hardly refrain from kissing it. Had any one told her before this moment that such a dress could exist, she would have said, "No, it's impossible." She drew back, went forward, flushed, laughed, raised her hands. To say that the maker of that dress had been an individual of talent was simply understatement. He was a genius, and she sunned herself in the rays of his creation. She then remembered that her friend without had told her to make haste, and she spasmodically proceeded to array herself. In removing the dress she found satin slippers, gloves, a handkerchief nearly all lace, a fan, and even flowers for the hair. "Oh, how could he think of it!" she said, clasping her hands and almost crying with agitation. "And the glass! How good of him!" Everything was so well prepared that to clothe herself in these garments was a matter of ease. In a quarter of an hour she was ready, even to shoes and gloves. But what led her more than anything else into admiration of the Baron's foresight was the discovery that there were half a dozen pairs each of shoes and gloves of varying sizes, out of which she selected a fit. Margery glanced at herself in the mirror, as much as she could see of herself. The image presented was superb. Then she hastily rolled up her old dress, put it in the box, and thrust the latter on a ledge as high as she could reach. Standing on tiptoe, she waved the handkerchief through the upper aperture, and bent to the rift to go out. But what a trouble stared her in the face! The dress was so airy, so fantastical, and so extensive, that to get out in her new clothes by the rift which had admitted her in her old ones was an impossibility. She heard the Baron's steps crackling over the dead sticks and leaves. "Oh, sir!" she began in distress. "What? Can't you dress yourself?" he inquired from the back of the trunk. "Yes, but I can't get out of this dreadful tree." He came round to the opening, stooped, and looked in. "It is obvious that you cannot," he said, taking in her compass at a glance, and adding to himself, "Charming! Who would have thought the clothes could do so much? Wait a minute, my little maid. I have it," he said more loudly. With all his might he kicked at the sides of the rift, and by that means broke away several pieces of the rotten touchwood. But being thinly armed about the feet, he abandoned the process, and went for a fallen branch which lay near. By using the large end as a lever, he tore away pieces of the wooden shell which enshrouded Margery in all her loveliness, till the aperture was large enough for her to pass without tearing her dress. She breathed her relief. The silly girl had begun to fear that she would not get to the ball after all. He carefully wrapped round her a cloak that he had brought with him. It was hooded, and of a length which covered her to the heels. "The carriage is waiting down the other path," he said, and gave her his arm. A short trudge over the soft dry leaves brought them to the place indicated. There stood the brougham, the horses, the coachman, all as still as if they were growing on the spot, like the trees. Margery's eyes rose with some timidity to the coachman's figure. "You need not mind him," said the Baron. "He is a foreigner, and heeds nothing." In the space of a short time she was handed inside. The Baron buttoned up his overcoat, and surprised her by mounting with the coachman. The carriage moved off silently over the long grass of the vista, the shadows deepening to black as they proceeded. Darker and darker grew the night as they rolled on. The neighbourhood familiar to Margery was soon left behind, and she had not the remotest idea of the direction they were taking. The stars blinked out, the coachman lit his lamps, and they bowled on again. In the course of an hour and a half they arrived at a small town, where they pulled up at the chief inn and changed horses, all being done so readily that their advent had plainly been expected. The journey was resumed immediately. Her companion never descended to speak to her. Whenever she looked out, there he sat upright on his perch, with the mien of a person who had a difficult duty to perform, and who meant to perform it properly at all costs. But Margery could not help feeling a certain dread at her situation, almost, indeed, a wish that she had not come. Once or twice she thought, "Suppose he is a wicked man, who is taking me off to a foreign country, and will never bring me home again." But a characteristic persistence and an original idea sustained her against these misgivings, except at odd moments. One incident in particular had given her confidence in her escort. She had seen a tear in his eye when she expressed her sorrow for his troubles. He may have divined that her thoughts would take an uneasy turn, for when they stopped for a moment in ascending a hill he came to the window. "Are you tired, Margery?" he asked kindly. "No, sir." "Are you afraid?" "No, sir. But it is a long way." "We are almost there," he answered. "And now, Margery," he said in a lower tone, "I must tell you a secret. I have obtained this invitation in a peculiar way. I thought it best for your sake not to come in my own name, and this is how I have managed. A man of this county, for whom I have lately done service, one whom I can trust, and who is personally as unknown here as you and I, has, privately, transferred his card of invitation to me, so that we go under his name. I explain this, that you may not say anything imprudent by accident. Keep your ears open, and be cautious.' Having said this, the Baron retreated again to his place. 'Then he is a wicked man after all,' she said to herself, 'for he is going under a false name.' But she soon had the temerity not to mind it. Wickedness of that sort was the one ingredient required just now to finish him off as a hero in her eyes. They descended a hill, past a lodge, then up an avenue, and presently there beamed upon them the light from other carriages, drawn up in a file, which moved on by degrees, and at last they halted before a large arched doorway, round which a group of people stood. 'We are among the latest arrivals on account of the distance,' said the Baron's reappearing. 'But never mind, they are 3 hours at least for your enjoyment.' The steps were promptly flung down, and they alighted. The steam from the flanks of their swarthy steeds, as they seemed to her, ascended to the parapet of the porch, and from their nostrils the hot breath jetted forth like smoke out of volcanoes, attracting the attention of all. Chapter 5.
The Romantic Adventures of a Milkmaid, by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 5. The bewildered Marjorie was led by the Baron up the steps to the interior of the house, whence the sounds of music and dancing were already proceeding. The tones were strange. At every fourth beat a deep and mighty note throbbed through the air, reaching Marjorie's soul with all the force of a blow. "What is that powerful tune, sir? I have never heard anything like it," she said. "The drum polka," answered the Baron. "The strange dance I spoke of, and that we practised, introduced from my country and other parts of the continent." Her surprise was not lessened when, at the entrance to the ballroom, she heard the names of her conductor and herself announced as Mr. and Miss Brown. However, nobody seemed to take any notice of the announcement, the room beyond being in a perfect turmoil of gaiety, and Marjorie's consternation at sailing under false colours subsided. At the same moment she observed awaiting them a handsome, dark-haired, rather petite lady in cream-coloured satin. "Who is she?" asked Marjorie of the Baron. "She is the lady of the mansion," he whispered. "She is the wife of a peer of the realm, the daughter of a marquis, has 5 Christian names, and hardly ever speaks to commoners, except for political purposes." "How divine! What joy to be here!" murmured Marjorie, as she contemplated the diamonds that flashed from the head of her ladyship, who was just inside the ballroom door, in front of a little gilded chair, upon which she sat in the intervals between one arrival and another. She had come down from London at great inconvenience to herself, openly to promote this entertainment. As Mr. and Miss Brown expressed absolutely no meaning to Lady Toneborough, for there were 3 Browns already present in this rather mixed assembly, and as there was possibly a slight awkwardness in poor Marjorie's manner, Lady Toneborough touched their hands lightly with the tips of her long gloves, said "How do you do?" and turned round for more comers. Ah, if she only knew we were a rich Baron and his friend, not Mr. and Miss Brown at all. She wouldn't receive us like that, would she? Whispered Marjorie confidentially. Indeed she wouldn't, dryly said the Baron. Now let us drop into the dance at once. Some of the people here, you see, dance much worse than you. Almost before she was aware, she had obeyed his mysterious influence by giving him one hand, placing the other upon his shoulder, and swinging with him round the room to the steps she had learnt on the sward. At the first glance the apartment had seemed to her to be floored with black ice, the figures of the dancers appearing upon it upside down. At last she realized that it was highly polished oak, but she was none the less afraid to move. "I am afraid of falling down," she said. "Lean on me. You will soon get used to it," he replied. "You have no nails in your shoes now, dear." His words, like all his words to her, were quite true. She found it amazingly easy in a brief space of time. The floor, far from hindering her, was a positive assistance to one of her natural agility and litheness. Moreover, her marvellous dress of 12 flounces inspired her as nothing else could have done. Externally a new creature, she was prompted to new deeds. To feel as well dressed as the other women around her is to set any woman at her ease, whencesoever she may have come. To feel much better dressed is to add radiance to that ease. Her prophet's statement on the popularity of the polka at this juncture was amply borne out. It was among the first seasons of its general adoption in country houses. The enthusiasm it excited tonight was beyond description, and scarcely credible to the youth of the present day. A new motive power had been introduced into the world of poesy, the polka, as a counterpoise to the new motive power that had been introduced into the world of prose, steam. 20 finished musicians sat in the music gallery at the end, with romantic mop-heads of raven hair, under which their faces and eyes shone like fire under coals. The nature and object of the ball had led to its being very inclusive. Every rank was there, from the peer to the smallest yeoman, and Marjorie got on exceedingly well, particularly when the recuperative powers of supper had banished the fatigue of her long drive. Sometimes she heard people saying, "Who are they? Brother and sister? Father and daughter? And never dancing except with each other? How odd!" But of this she took no notice. When not dancing, the watchful Baron took her through the drawing-rooms and picture galleries adjoining, which to-night were thrown open like the rest of the house, and there, ensconcing her in some curtained nook, he drew her attention to scrap-books, prints, and albums, and left her to amuse herself with turning them over till the dance in which she was practised should again be called. Marjorie would much have preferred to roam about during these intervals, but the words of the Baron were law, and as he commanded, so she acted. In such alternations the evening winged away, till at last came the gloomy words, "Marjorie, our time is up." "One more, only one," she coaxed, for the longer they stayed the more freely and gaily moved the dance. This entreaty he granted, but on her asking for yet another he was inexorable. "No," he said, "we have a long way to go." Then she bade adieu to the wondrous scene, looking over her shoulder as they withdrew from the hall, and in a few minutes she was cloaked and in the carriage. The Baron mounted to his seat on the box, where she saw him light a cigar. They plunged under the trees, and she leant back and gave herself up to contemplate the images that filled her brain. The natural results followed. She fell asleep. She did not awake till they stopped to change horses, when she saw against the stars the Baron sitting as erect as ever. "He watches like the angel Gabriel, when all the world is asleep," she thought. With the resumption of motion she slept again, and knew no more till he touched her hand and said, "Our journey is done. We are in Chillington Wood." It was almost daylight. Marjorie scarcely knew herself to be awake till she was out of the carriage and standing beside the Baron, who, having told the coachman to drive on to a certain point indicated, turned to her. "Now," he said, smiling, "run across to the hollow tree. You know where it is. I'll wait as before while you perform the reverse operation to that you did last night." She took no heed of the path now, nor regarded whether her pretty slippers became scratched by the brambles or no. A walk of a few steps brought her to the particular tree which she had left about 9 hours earlier. It was still gloomy at this spot, the morning not being clear. She entered the trunk, dislodged the box containing her old clothing, pulled off the satin shoes, and gloves, dress, and in 10 minutes emerged in the cotton and shawl of shepherd's plaid. Baron was not far off. "Now you look the milkmaid again," he said, coming towards her. "Where is the finery?" "Packed in the box, sir, as I found it." She spoke with more humility now. The difference between them was greater than it had been at the ball. "Good," he said. "I must just dispose of it, and then away we go." He went back to the tree, Marjorie following at a little distance. Bringing forth the box, he pulled out the dress as carelessly as if it had been rags. But this was not all. He gathered a few dry sticks, crushed the lovely garment into a loose billowy heap, threw the gloves, fan, and shoes on the top, then struck a light, and ruthlessly set fire to the whole. Marjorie was agonized. She ran forward, she implored and entreated. "Please, sir, do spare it, do! My lovely dress, my dear, dear slippers, my fan. It is cruel. Don't burn them, please." "Nonsense. We shall have no further use for them if we live 100 years. "But spare a bit of it. One little piece, sir. A scrap of the lace. One bow of the ribbon. A lovely fan, just something. But he was immovable as Rhadamanthus. No, he said, with a stern gaze of his aristocratic eye, it is of no use for you to speak like that. These things are my property. I undertook to gratify you in what you might desire, because you had saved my life. To go to a ball, you said. You might much more wisely have said anything else, but no, you said, to go to a ball. Very well. I have taken you to a ball. I have brought you back. The clothes were only the means, and I dispose of them my own way. Have I not a right to? Yes, sir, she said meekly. He gave the fire a stir, and lace and ribbons and the 12 flounces and the embroidery and all the rest crackled and disappeared. He then put in her hands the butter basket she had brought to take on to her grandmother's, and accompanied her to the edge of the wood, where it merged in the undulating open country in which her grandam dwelt. Now, Marjorie, he said, here we part. I have performed my contract, at some awkwardness if I was recognized, but never mind that. How do you feel? Sleepy? Not at all, sir, she said. That long nap refreshed you, eh? Now you must make me a promise, that if I require your presence at any time, you will come to me. I am a man of more than one mood, he went on with sudden solemnity, and I may have desperate need of you again, to deliver me from that darkness as of death which sometimes encompasses me. Promise it, Marjorie. Promise it, that no matter what stands in the way, you will come to me if I require you. I would have, if you had not burnt my pretty clothes, she pouted. Ah, ungrateful. Indeed, then, I will promise, sir, she said from her heart. Wherever I am, if I have bodily strength, I will come to you. He pressed her hand. It is a solemn promise, he replied. Now I must go, for you know your way. I shall hardly believe that it has not been all a dream, she said, with a childish instinct to cry at his withdrawal. There will be nothing left of last night, nothing of my dress, nothing of my pleasure, nothing of the place. You shall remember it in this way, said he. We'll cut our initials on this tree as a memorial, so that whenever you walk this path you will see them. Then with a knife he inscribed on the smooth bark of a beech tree the letters M.T., and underneath a large X. What, have you no Christian name, sir? She said. Yes, but I don't use it. Now, good-bye, my little friend. What will you do with yourself to-day, when you are gone from me? He lingered to ask. Oh, I shall go to my granny's, she replied with some gloom, and have breakfast and dinner and tea with her, I suppose, and in the evening I shall go home to Silverthorn Dairy, and perhaps Jim will come to meet me, and all will be the same as usual. Who is Jim? Oh, he's nobody, only the young man I've got to marry some day. What? You engaged to be married? Why didn't you tell me this before? I don't know, sir. What is the young man's name? James Hayward. What is he? A master lime-burner. Engaged to a master lime-burner, and not a word of this to me. Marjorie, Marjorie, when shall a straightforward one of your sex be found? Subtle even in your simplicity. What mischief have you caused me to do through not telling me this? I wouldn't have so endangered anybody's happiness for 1,000 pounds. Wicked girl that you were, why didn't you tell me? I thought I'd better not, said Marjorie, beginning to be frightened. But don't you see and understand that if you are already the property of a young man, and he were to find out this night's excursion, he may be angry with you and part from you forever? With him already in the field, I had no right to take you at all. He undoubtedly ought to have taken you, which really might have been arranged if you had not deceived me by saying you had nobody. Marjorie's face wore that aspect of woe which comes from the repentant consciousness of having been guilty of an enormity. But he wasn't good enough to take me, sir, she said, almost crying. And he isn't absolutely my master until I've married him, is he? That's a subject I cannot go into. However, we must alter our tactics. Instead of advising you, as I did at first, to tell of this experience to your friends, I must now impress on you that it will be best to keep a silent tongue on the matter, perhaps for ever and ever. It may come right some day, and you may be able to say, 'All's well that ends well.' Now good morning, my friend. Think of Jim, and forget me."
Perhaps I can't do that," she said, with a tear in her eye and a full throat.
"Well, do your best. I can say no more."
He turned and retreated into the wood, and Marjorie, sighing, went on her way. End of Chapter 5. The Romantic Adventures of a Milkmaid, by Thomas Hardy. The Romantic Adventures of a Milkmaid, by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 6. Between 6 and 7 o'clock in the evening of the same day, a young man descended the hills into the valley of the Exe, at a point about midway between Silverthorn and the residence of Marjorie's grandmother, 4 miles to the east. He was a thoroughbred son of the country, as far removed from what is known as the provincial as the latter is from the out-and-out gentleman of culture. His trousers and waistcoat were of fustian, almost white, but he wore a jacket of old-fashioned blue West of England cloth, so well preserved that evidently the article was relegated to a box whenever its owner engaged in such active occupations as he usually pursued. His complexion was fair, almost florid, and he had scarcely any beard. A novel attraction about this young man, which a glancing stranger would know nothing of, was a rare and curious freshness of atmosphere that appertained to him, to his clothes, to all his belongings, even to the room in which he had been sitting. It might almost have been said that by adding him and his implements to an overcrowded apartment, you made it healthful. This resulted from his trade. He was a lime burner. He handled lime daily, and in return the lime rendered him an incarnation of salubrity. His hair was dry, fair, and frizzled, the latter possibly by the operation of the same caustic agent. He carried as a walking-stick a green sapling, whose growth had been contorted to a corkscrew pattern by a twining honeysuckle. As he descended to the level ground of the water meadows, he cast his glance westward with a frequency that revealed him to be in search of some object in the distance. It was rather difficult to do this, the low sunlight dazzling his eyes by glancing from the river away there, and from the carriers, as they were called, in his path, narrow artificial brooks for conducting the water over the grass. His course was something of a zigzag from the necessity of finding points in these carriers convenient for jumping. Thus peering and leaping and winding, he drew near the Exe, the central river of the miles-long mead. A moving spot became visible to him in the direction of his scrutiny, mixed up with the rays of the same river. The spot got nearer, and revealed itself to be a slight thing of pink cotton and shepherd's plaid, which pursued a path on the brink of the stream. The young man so shaped his trackless course as to impinge on the path a little ahead of this coloured form, and when he drew near her he smiled and reddened. The girl smiled back to him, but her smile had not the life in it that the young man's had shown. "My dear Marjorie, here I am," he said gladly in an undertone, as with a last leap he crossed the last intervening carrier and stood at her side. "You've come all the way from the kiln on purpose to meet me, and you shouldn't have done it," she reproachfully returned. "We finished there at 4, so it was no trouble, and if it had been, why, I should ha' come." A small sigh was the response. "What, you're not even so glad to see me as you would be to see your dog or cat?" he continued. "Come, Mrs. Marjorie, this is rather hard. But, by George, how tired you do look! Why, if you'd been up all night, your eyes couldn't be more like tea saucers. You've walked too far, that's what it is. The weather is getting warm now, and the air of these low-lying meads is not strengthening in summer. I wish you lived up on higher ground with me, beside the kiln. You'd get as strong as a hoss. Well, there, all that will come in time." Instead of saying yes, the fair maid repressed another sigh. "What, won't it then?" he said. "I suppose so," she answered. "If it is to be, it is." "Well said, very well said, my dear." "And if it isn't to be, it isn't." "What, who's been putting that in your head? Your grumpy granny, I suppose. However, how is she?"
Margery, I've been thinking to-day, in fact I was thinking it yesterday and all the week, that really we might settle our little business this summer. This summer, she repeated with some dismay. But the partnership? Remember, it was not to be till after that was completed. There I have ye, said he, taking the liberty to pat her shoulder, and the further liberty of advancing his hand behind it to the other. The partnership is settled. 'Tis Vine and Hayward, lime-burners now, and Richard Vine no longer. Yes, cousin Richard has settled it so, for a time at least, and 'tis to be painted on the carts this week. Blue letters, yaller ground. I'll boss one of 'em, and drive en round to your door as soon as the paint is dry, to show 'ee how it looks. Oh, I'm sure you needn't take that trouble, Jim. I can see it quite well enough in my mind, replied the young girl, not without a flitting accent of superiority. Hullo, said Jim, taking her by the shoulders and looking at her hard. What do that bit of incivility mean? Now, Margery, let's sit down here, and have this cleared. He rapped with his stick upon the rail of a little bridge they were crossing, and seated himself firmly, leaving a place for her. But I want to get home along, dear Jim, she coaxed. Fidgets. Sit down, there's a dear. I want a straightforward answer, if you please. In what month, and on what day of the month, will you marry me? Oh, Jim, she said, sitting gingerly on the edge, that's too plain spoken for you yet. Before I look at it in that business light, I should have to... But your father has settled it long ago, and you said it should be as soon as I became a partner. So, dear, you must not mind a plain man wanting a plain answer. Come, name your time. She did not reply at once. What thoughts were passing through her brain during the interval? Not images raised by his words, but whirling figures of men and women in red and white and blue reflected from a glassy floor, in movements timed by the thrilling beats of the drum polka. At last she said slowly, Jim, you don't know the world, and what a woman's wants can be. But I can make you comfortable. I am in lodgings as yet, but I can have a house for the asking, and as to furniture, you shall choose of the best for yourself, the very best. The best! Far are you from knowing what that is, said the little woman. There be ornaments such as you never dream of, work-tables that would set you in a maze, silver candlesticks, tea and coffee pots that would dazzle your eyes, teacups and saucers, gilded all over with guinea gold, heavy velvet curtains, gold clocks, pictures, and looking-glasses beyond your very dreams. So don't say I shall have the best. Said Jim gloomily, and fell into reflection. Where did you get those high notions from, Margery? He presently inquired. I'll swear you hadn't got 'em a week ago. She did not answer, and he added, You don't expect to have such things, I hope, deserve them as you may. I was not exactly speaking of what I wanted, she said severely. I said things a woman could want, and since you wish to know what I can want to quite satisfy me, I assure you I can want those. You are a pink and white conundrum, Margery, he said, and I give you up for tonight. Anybody would think the devil had showed you all the kingdoms of the world since I saw you last. She reddened. Perhaps he has, she murmured, then arose, he following her, and they soon reached Margery's home, approaching it from the lower or meadow side, the opposite to that of the garden top where she had met the Baron. You'll come in, won't you, Jim? She said, with more ceremony than heartiness. No, I think not tonight, he answered. I'll consider what you've said. You're very good, Jim, she returned lightly. Goodbye. The end of Chapter 6. The Romantic Adventures of a Milkmaid, by Thomas Hardy.